Okay, welcome to another S6 political science class. We are still talking about the EU. Today, we're going to delve into a discussion of um, a couple of institutions within the EU, but we're going to talk about them in terms of one traditional, conventional branch of government, so which is the executive branch. So we're going to take a look at the European Council and the European Commission. The European Council. This was established in 1974. We said it already. It consists of this, a body that consists of those heads of states and governments who are democratically elected by their own constituents back in their own countries. The body itself includes the Council President and the President of the European Commission. But mind you, when there's voting, these two members, they don't actually participate in the vote. The body itself, the European Council, gives the EU a broad strategic direction. So they set the policy agenda. They don't necessarily, um, you know, uh, pass laws, okay? But they decide what they take to be important, what's put on the agenda, what's discussed, okay? Also, the members of this council, they also gather together in order to, try to tackle crises. So, the European Council meets quarterly or twice every 6 months. So that refers to plenary sessions, plenary meaning everyone is there. But there could also be bilateral meetings. So that would mean a meeting between the president of the council and one head of state, for instance. And there could also be ad hoc. Ad hoc means for this. So for a particular topic, for a particular, let's say, policy area. So there could be ad hoc meetings for specific emergencies. The president of the council is elected for a term of 2.5 years, and the term can be renewed once by qualified. The voting is done by qualified majority. I'll explain that in a minute. The current president of the European Council is Charles Michel. Okay, Belgium. Just a brief explanation of qualified majority voting. Here's a definition. It's a, a method or a kind of voting in which different majorities are needed on different issues. Okay, but you need a kind of majority, not a simple one, though. Not, for instance, if there were 100 members, 50 plus 1, that would count as a simple majority. But here it's a qualified majority, a different kind, and the votes are weighted according to the size of the member or the population of that particular member state. These days, in the EU, most policy areas require qualified majority voting instead of a unanimous vote. Why? What's the problem with the unanimous vote? You know, um, the thing with the unanimous vote is that what could be problematic there is that a single country can block legislation or can block a decision. Okay, so any particular country, if it doesn't like a policy proposal, it could just block it, it could veto it, could just totally refuse and nothing happens. Okay, now Uh, with the use of qualified majority voting, so you can pass a new policy, for instance, in two ways. So, or there are, let me rephrase that. There are two types of QMV. So you have the standard one, which is used for passing just regular legislation. Okay, that would require a vote coming from about 55% of the members, and those member states need to represent about 62% or 65% of the European population. Okay, I'll change that to 65. On the other hand, for other matters like appointing the head of the central bank, you would need a reinforced qualified majority voting, meaning 72% of the member states need to approve this appointment. And the number of members, the, the percentage of members should also reflect the same percentage in terms of the populace, okay, in terms of um, the number of people, European people that they represent. Okay, moving on. The European Commission, we already talked about this body when we gave that overview of the EU institutions. The European Commission is definitely also part of the executive branch. Um, there is a president of this body. The current one is Ursula von der Leyen. And you can say that this president, among the many other presidents in the EU, has the most day-to-day executive authority. So the European Commission has a 30,000 strong staff. So those are staff members. These are, government workers. And the president of the European Commission also sits in with the European Council, as we mentioned before. As a political unit, the European Commission has these functions. So it proposes laws. It's the only one that has the right to propose laws. It drafts and manages the budget. It oversees the implementation of decisions. So it makes sure that policy is implemented across the different institutions, across the different countries. It issues regulations, and it represents the European Union in different meetings, negotiations in various international organizations. So within the European Commission, you have this sort of hierarchy. So you have the president at the top, and then below the president, you would have the College of Commissioners, and then all the rest of the staff, about 30,000 people. Okay, so the members of the College of Commissioners, they are appointed by the council, the European Council, but at the same time approved. They have to be approved by the European Parliament. So again, you can see that you know a kind of intergovernmental interaction there. Um, so each member state has a commissioner, but then each commissioner is expected to work for the interests of the EU, not for the interest of the nation state. And each commissioner would be responsible for a portfolio, so much like a cabinet minister. So, for instance, these matters are given to specific people, so foreign affairs and security, trade and competition, and the rest, the 24 other commissioners, would be in charge of one of these things. Okay, each one of them would be in charge of one. This is something that we already mentioned before. The European Commission has the right of initiative. So it's the only body that has the right to propose policy, to propose legislation. Legislation that is applicable to areas that are determined by the member states, meaning the European Council. Excuse me. So this would require a process of consultation and negotiation. So different committees within the European Parliament would make suggestions with regard to, the proposed policy, and you would have members of Parliament of the European Parliament sponsoring policy proposals, and then interest group representatives would also be involved, and these are called lobbyists, and they would be in constant contact with the other players in the process of bringing about the passage of a particular legislative proposal. Now, as you can see here, like we said, two other bodies, the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers. These two, they have co-decision making powers. So whatever is proposed by the European Commission will have to be approved by the EU Parliament and the Council of Ministers. Just in summary, taking a look at the executive branch, we see that the executive branch, uh, they answer to their home parliaments. So members of the executive branch, they are responsible to their home parliaments. So the Council of the EU or the Council of Ministers, they are responsible to their own uh, parliaments back home. Okay, but elements in the executive branch are also answerable to the European Parliament. Okay, so the European Council, the European Commission, they, you know, they answer to the Parliament. And of course, the executive branch is also answerable to the courts, because the the court of the European Union has jurisdiction over interpretation of law and the settling of disputes, and also while the executive branch proposes and approves the budget, it's the Court of Auditors that oversees that and checks if everything is in order. So again, you have um, the traditional branches of government, but at the same time, you have the traditional checks and balances at the same time.